Hello! Welcome to the Pico de Gallo podcast, also known as Making the Rounds. Because apparently I'm a tomato and Emily is an onion, so delicious. Also, we're very white, so I did not mean to offend anyone. But
Oh my god.
we are
The
continuing
veggie
on.
quiz.
There was a vegetable quiz. Tomatoes are not vegetables. It doesn't matter. It's a whole stupid
Yeah.
thing.
Actually, I'm a fruit, right? Oh wait, no, I'm the onion.
You're
Never
the
mind.
onion, and I'm apparently a fruit, but tomatoes are also delicious, so I will accept it. It's chill. Yeah, so anyway, it is another week of League of Legends happening. Unfortunately, I've been kind of all over the place, so we're back to our roots of making the rounds in random hotel rooms, at least for me. Um, and Emily is still vibing in Los
Mhm.
Angeles. It's great. But basically, we wanted to talk at least sometime this week about League because a lot of League things are happening. It's a very fun week. Um, like we have LPL. Why am I? Okay, I'm fine. We have LPL Play-In starting.
See what's going on. Let's
we,
just actually go into the Twitch
we
stream.
have
What are you
LPL.
doing?
We have LPL Play-ins starting. We have one of the most hype matches of the season in NA coming up. We have LCK existing, and apparently a lot of people still hate Europe. So we're gonna go ahead and start
We
with.
are gonna talk about that.
We're gonna go ahead and start with LPL. Um, yeah, apparently I say it is what it is, but I don't even know if that was on that quiz. Anyway, so basically we're gonna go ahead and talk about LPL. The play-in sequence, for those of you who don't know, is gonna be the top four teams from Group Nirvana, and the bottom two teams, or bottom two teams from Group Ascend,
Yeah.
um, which I also referred to as the Descent when we got to watch NIP versus LGD this week because it's literally what it was. We were deprived of IG versus NIP, so that's unfortunate. However,
A grudge match,
oh
I guess.
yes, our opening round is IG versus LGD. So, any thoughts on that one, Emily?
Uh, it should be an LGD win, I think. I don't think IG are very good.
Wow.
Um, this is going to be
Mhm.
really interesting in terms of looking at just just more generally because we only have the one match that is the two teams from Group Ascent.
Yeah.
Um, and the really interesting case is obviously NIP, just based on the fact that that's Rookie's team, and also they went winless in series in their group against all of the top teams, whereas LGD did not. Um, but I just think, I mean, they're a better team than IG. They should win. I actually, so I've like starting what in spring. I actually have really enjoyed watching LGD's like evolution, not because they're good, but because they just like try things. Um, and they have actually improved from spring to summer, in my opinion, to the point where they had some surprisingly good games against some of the top teams in their group. Um, so with and I feel like I cannot say the same thing for IG necessarily, right? Like as much as I'd love to cheer on like YSKM specifically, just because I think he's a really fun personality. Um, I do not have any hope for IG. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I think when you compare these two teams, LGD, in my opinion, have actually evolved and improved in some things, and IG have kind of just remained somewhat stagnant despite swapping around a few of their players. So
Yeah, and I mean, IG made money selling players to EDG who still didn't qualify for the Play-In. So yay!
Yeah.
Good for IG in terms of that metric. I think LGD is super interesting. Like you said, this experiment is really interesting because we get to see if playing in the same pool as the allegedly higher level group ascend teams makes you stronger, even if you go winless, right? Because both NIP and LGD didn't win a series versus anyone but each other, right? The one at the end. So the question is does
Just
getting
went to LGE.
does getting dunked on, and in theory also
Yes.
scrimming, like having more access to scrimming the top teams, make you better, or does it kind of demoralize you mentally and make it so you get completely destroyed by a team like IG that maybe it didn't start out as good at the start of the season, but didn't necessarily constantly face defeat all season. So it's an interesting one for sure. I think it will really depend. Like if IG win the first game, maybe LGD collapses, whatever. These types of questions. But in theory, I think LGD should for sure win. I think a lot of their understanding of how to play around the jungle is stronger. I think YSKM can carry games on certain champs, but there have also been sequences where I feel like with YSKM, like I'm kind of a YSKM doubter, but every time he has like this patch or this bright spot, I start saying, like actually his Camille is good. He could probably do something this game, and then he loses to Casante down like 50 CS, so it's chill. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be an interesting one, I think. But LGD, like they play around jungle better. They definitely like. I think Haichao's champ pool has kind of been figured out, but at the same time, he does have a lot of bright moments. People have been excited to watch him this split. So yeah, we'll see. And of course, it's Meadower, the return of Meadower.
So just think, in particular, Vampire is tough to watch. It's hard for me to. It's really hard for me to see IG winning
Yeah,
outside of kind of like you said, right? Where either they're playing hard through topside and they get into a position where YSKM is carrying on one of his champs, or the toll, like the kind of NA and sometimes EU like scrims at Worlds Classic where you go to learn and you get shit on so hard that you don't have any sort of scrims that are kind of easy wins that are allowing you to recover your mental and just kind of like play out a game where you win. Um that the better practice you're getting against better teams is offset by the fact that you are just like absolutely destroyed mentally. That is going to be the test for this group. It's in particular, I think, going to be the test for the next series, which is NIP versus RA. Because yeah, NIP, we talked about whether the jungle change was going to make a difference, and we both had kind of decided on no. Um, and it it really sucks to see the names on this roster. In particular, I'd say Rookie and then also Shanji. I want to include in there just because I feel like everyone was super hyped for his trajectory post OMG, and when you have a player that does super well on a team that's just full of other young talent or like is kind of surprising people, kind of like AL are a little bit right now is kind of the comp from last year to this year. You want those players to kind of matriculate up to better teams. And in theory, I think that's what this NIP roster was kind of supposed to be for him is going to like an org with a roster that might be able to do something a little bit more overall in LPL. and they have just had such an awful summer, like, season, group stage, or whatever you want to call it. Um, it's been really, really rough.
Yeah, I mean, I had some faith in. I think, like I said before, I had some faith in NIP because I think they were creative and good at drafting around what they had in spring. Because I don't feel like their players suddenly got worse. I think it's just the same team, right? It's just that
Mhm.
it's harder for them to find things they're good at when you have Aki as your jungler, and the meta is suddenly drastically swinging towards jungle, but also like rookie pool didn't seem to work as well this split. Um, like he wasn't able to impact the map as much. He also didn't perform as well individually. And it's a little bit sad when Shanchi gets rumble one game and then the next game loses on it anyway. So it's tragic, but I think the ultimately for me, I actually kind of it's still hard for me to take RA on this one, just
Yes,
because I've seen RA throw so many games. We're gonna talk about Fnatic and G2 in a second, but if you guys have been shitting on Fnatic and think that being able to lose leads makes you the worst team in the world, then
you're gonna hate RA.
Watch some rare Adam, man. Like, this is such a good time. We just take like really bad fights and really bad scenarios. I think the one thing that they could have going for them though is Photic is supposed to be carrying these late game fights, and I don't think he will perform that well. Um, unless they just say fuck it and pick Jinx. That's what I'm holding out for because I do think Photic's Jinx is good. Almost everything else he has picked, I've been less impressed by, but um, yeah, we'll see, we'll see. I think it's hard. It's like one of those matchups where I don't know if I would expect either team to win. Someone has
Yeah.
to, by God. So I don't know. I'm not sure,
I mean,
honestly. I feel like maybe I have slightly more faith in RA just because it feels like you do have members who are actually able to perform decently well in the meta. Whereas I think with NIP at the moment, everyone just looks completely lost. Like, we talked about Loyan being able to play with more of the carry farming junglers, but that was the worst Karthus performance I've seen, I think, in my entire life. So, yeah, it is one of those.
yeah, I mean, so I'll say theoretically, I do think NIP should win. Um, the the really big issue, to reiterate your point, is also some occasionally they just keep slamming things that in this meta, as they're still trying to figure it out, that just are not working for them. Um, which is also really frustrating to see. So if RA can just be more stable and pick a very easy to execute comp, can definitely see them winning out. Um, in terms of actual gameplay, I do think NIP should win, provided that they're not completely mentally boomed after losing every single series in their group, and coming off of that LGD loss, which was really, really tough.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Ray Adam. I think I'm taking
Nice,
him.
let's
Yeah.
go. We'll
So
split it. We'll see who wins.
this is the highlight match, the controversy match. Oh, exciting. And then there's OMGTT, which we recently saw this matchup anyway. So,
Yeah.
I guess the question is, do we think it will go differently? And TT will pull it out.
So these are two other teams where I'm kind of like, whoever ends up, like, I'll ask a question on the back end of this, which is like, do you see any of these teams making any sort of noise coming out of play-ins and going into playoffs? But um one thing that I will give credit for TT on is that I'm like 99% sure that UCal was the first Zeri mid in like a major region. Um And I think they've found their home in the current meta very well. Even if they still make a lot of mistakes in terms of like execution and team fight team fighting. Like even in the RNG series that they played, there was that part where they almost threw it Baron due to like a bad team fight after they got the Baron and could have easily just like gotten out. I think it was at like 30 minutes or something. But I do think that their adoption of this meta has been something that they at least seem like fairly comfortable with. Even though I wouldn't say they're a particularly good team. Um, and that's kind of why I'd give them the edge. I know like everyone wants, and by everyone I say like Rafa specifically. The other day at when we were prepping, he's like, "Oh man, are you excited for OMG? Like Tianzen's playing Rengar," and I'm like, "Yeah, he does that." It doesn't work a lot of the
Yeah, it's kind of
time.
normal. I mean, they ban it against him, so there's that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like he is known as a Rengar player, and like Rafa was so excited. He's like, "I'm behind this guy 100%," and I'm like,
I
"Okay."
know, Chad Juggle is plays a lot of Rengar. He sometimes clips like T engine moments. Good times, good shit.
Um, but yeah, I think so. For me, OMG has actually had like higher individual highs as a team, but I think TT's adoption of the meta has been something that they've seemed like, if not comfortable with, then like very willing to play and keep slamming. Um, which I've actually liked out of them. So I'm giving the edge to TT. Um, somewhat biased with their most recent performance, but also just just based on that.
Yeah, I think Thunder Talk is interesting. But did you already forget about the M&S Zeri? It's classic.
Wait, I oh my
He
god.
did it in summer last year. And everyone was like,
Ugh.
"What are you doing, bro?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I mean, it looked good. And they lost that game, and it was like a 2-0-2, and then we played them next, and we're like, "Yeah, C9 look like shit right now, and we got completely destroyed." Anyway, um, the
Somehow block that out of my mind.
yeah, I mean, he kind of played it on a whim, but I think the other thing is Thunder Talk. I think they have probably like arguably one of the best ball lanes in the league, unironically. I think Ishan 1xN is like very good, and then you have Feather has been stepping up quite a bit. Like I actually think part of the reason why TT look so much better is Feather is just a way better player than Chocho at the moment, even if he's like kind of raw. Um, in terms of like who I think wins, I don't know. I feel like OMG have like a decent shot. It's not terrible, but who knows? Who knows? Who can say? I had like OMG going into the series, but I do think it's just like honestly, if you ban Ezreal, I'm really curious how TT go because I think part of the reason why Ezreal has been so good for them is when I Sen can just like self peel and it doesn't matter. Um, but they struggled a lot more when he wasn't able to pick that champ. And it's not. I think it's just their ability to coordinate and play around him that is struggling because he's been a very good player basically since he's been in the league. So we'll see though. I think Thunder Talk can be very interesting. Um, they probably are the most interesting team from the play-in going into the groups or the main playoff stage if they make it. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see on that one.
of these teams do you think has like the best shot? Because obviously, like
Yeah.
I am personally writing off every single all six of these teams in terms of
I
winning
mean, I think
LPL.
TT probably
But
does, just because they haven't actually, in my opinion, like top elite bot lane, just like randomly, which I think helps a lot. I think that gives them an option. Like for example, you just have Jackie Love randomly dying as MF in lane and still winning the game. So we've got that going for us. So I think they have more of a chance to pull like random game upsets, but I don't think they'll make it far. So yeah. Well, that was an exciting episode of Playing Teams Suck. Uh, let's
you
move
could hear you could hear the belief we have in all of these
on all. No,
teams.
I
I
mean,
feel like
my desire to believe in these teams is just crashed and burned after Ultra Prime didn't make it.
rip.
Bless Ultra Prime. Bless first time Italy from Hacker. Anyway, but Vampire though, Vampire stonks. There's a
Oh my
Peepo
god.
Vampire emote in my chat just for him. He's precious.
Good for
Um,
him.
um, yeah. Okay, we should talk about things that aren't LPL before I just start making random references to Ultraman. C9TL is on the list next. I don't have it in front of me, and if I tab out, then your cam will
It's
disappear. Okay.
LEC finals post mortem, which I think
Okay.
is the biggest topic we probably have.
Okay. So that's the next one. All right.
Yeah.
We will talk about the LEC finals, which a lot of people are calling the worst LEC finals in history. And Emily and I talked a little bit about this because we were trying to remember, like, what were the worst LEC finals or EULCS finals, as it was previously called, that we can remember? There have been some pretty bad ones. So,
We remembered some stinkers. We had a good trip down memory lane, and by trip I mean I still to this day hold a grudge against Fnatic and UOL for keeping me trapped there for 5 games in their spring final of 2015. The big thing here is I'll say it's also in context, right? Because when I say I want to make it clear to people who are watching this back, especially that when I'm talking about worst finals, it's like worst finals in the context of gameplay at the time, right? Um, just because I think that's important, because I don't want this to turn into something where it's like, well, obviously these aren't the worst finals because these two teams just know more about the game because it's 2024 and not 2015. Um, that's not what I'm talking about. But I could think of finals that were way like I was much more disappointed to watch, or like just came out of it with like a really icky like, oh god, like both of these teams are really bad. And the first one off the top of my head was that original one that I mentioned, which is the 2015 spring finals, spring EULCS finals with UOL versus Fnatic. That Fnatic team would actually later go on to improve and look like really good throughout the back half of that season. But those spring finals were really bad, and it was 5 total games that I was stuck there watching. I mean, I wasn't stuck there. I could have stopped watching, but I didn't because I'm a masochist. But like I think the big thing for me in terms of the reaction, the very visceral reaction to these finals, is that within the context of how people are like, there are a lot of contexts here. This is actually a super broad topic for me personally, with a lot of different facets to it, because there's like I don't know how in depth we want to go into each of these, but for me there's the fact that Fnatic beat G2 leading up to this. So you're kind of like, okay, well, G2 are not playing as well as like we've seen this team be able to play. Fnatic look like they can beat them. They did before in a 5-game series. We want this finals to be like super close and super competitive. There's the context of the fact that G2 historically, and by historically I mean the 2019 kind of golden year, but then also even as recently as this past MSI, has been the LEC team that's made the most noise against international competition. And when G2 don't look at their best domestically, people start worrying about, oh, if this is our best team that we can send to internationals, then we're very much in trouble. And then there's also the, I will say, very infuriating way that Fnatic lost a lot of these games. And it got progressively more infuriating, in my opinion, as the series went on, right? And I think there's a lot of like expectations as part of why people are disappointed. It's the way that Fnatic lost in particular is why people are disappointed, because I actually thought like the level of gameplay had issues. There were a lot of mechanical mistakes from both sides, but in particular, I think G2 made a lot of mechanical mistakes early, like especially in their bot lane 2v2s. It was pretty rough. Um and they also, I'll say generally when G2 have had rough early games, like we talked about this past spring, there was always a lot of really cool and clever things you would see them doing, either with reintroducing lane swaps or particular lane assignments, the way that they were attacking their opponents in the mid game. And I also think we saw less of that in this Fnatic series, where what it did end up coming down to is that G2 would often pick, in particular with the having Broken Blade opt into the Ornn, they would have these team fighting comps that would do a lot of damage late game that were sometimes just easier to execute, even when they would fuck over their early games super, super hard. And that's always, I think, an infuriating way to win. And on the flip side, an infuriating way to watch a team lose when they get a really good lead and then successively throw, where it becomes like more egregious from game to game to game. And then additionally, like wrapping all of this, and then I'll stop ranting about it for a little bit. I'm sure I'll chime in later. But like there's also the international part adding on to G2's performance internationally, where it's also the swing between how people see NA and EU as regions is often dictated by how much they can punch up to LCK or LPL teams internationally. And it has looked like TL has had some stronger performances recently internationally than, in some cases, G2. I actually still think this is a little bit arguable, and it also depends on opponents, but I think the perception of the strength of the region is so dictated by this factor. And with the expectations that are set on G2 of them being kind of this team that you are looking at to be your best international performer, having them win a finals like this is disappointing. And it also there's also the weirdness of the a lot of people's complaints with like the way that LEC schedule is working, where it doesn't seem always like the teams with more recent momentum are going to be rewarded versus the way that championship points work across the three splits. Um so all that, I can delve into more into any of those, but I will let you go because I've been talking for too long.
Well, I just want to say this final is a potential preview of TS versus PLG.
Oh god.
No, I mean, because I definitely did get vibes because it was just Jackie Love randomly dying in bot lane on MF, and then they still won, right? In their most recent series versus JDG, it was TS JDG
Hmm.
I was watching. And then you have like BLG unable to have a cohesive mid game at all, so I guess my main issue is that obviously the context is that people are very disappointed that Fnatic lost with the lead. But I also just don't think that the series was particularly worse than series I watch every day. If that makes sense, in terms of like the context of quality. So it didn't necessarily seem like the worst finals ever. Like 2014 Alliance Fnatic, I was like, why do people even watch this region? It's just like we don't actually do anything. I remember that being my feeling, you know? Um, but for me, the most interesting thing about the reaction to the final is more the community zeitgeist that tends to happen with like these types of things. Like if you make a random tweet about how shit G2 and Fnatic are and how they need to have their heads examined, then oh my god, it's actually so crazy. You're more likely to get a popular figure retweeting you than if you say, well, actually, guys, it wasn't that bad, or something along those lines. Or if you actually say G2's gonna slam dunk out Worlds, people just completely like, you get 3 likes. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like the perception of you if you are going along with the zeitgeist, you are more likely to get impressions and snowball off of that than in the context of social media. So it's very easy for the prevailing opinion to just kind of snowball in that way. So if you are of the opinion that like G2 is performing better than TL, right? If you're, let's say, because I didn't watch a tournament that shall not be named, and so my recent international read
I didn't either.
is
Yeah.
MSI, right? And G2 did perform better versus T1 in particular. We saw that series. They took T1 to 5 games in the first series, and then of course you had TL versus T1, which people were I think like the expectations on TL, to your point, are like much lower going into that tournament than the expectations were on G2. Everyone expects like the standard that G2 has set for themselves is we will contest internationally. Whereas the standard TL have set for themselves is we're a plucky team with some old guys and some new kids that did really badly for a lot of spring season. Um, but it's interesting because I'm very curious to see how TL do. Like if they make it to Worlds, in theory they should. Um, how if those expectations do change because I see people now saying is TL the greatest Western team of all time and comments like that, right? So Emily's reaction. I'm just
Not seeing
saying
these
this
comments.
is what I see people say. And I'm like I see LEC worst LEC finals of all time and greatest Western team of all time, all in the same year. It's crazy. But the but I think that expectation definitely plays into people's perceptions of the team. The thing about G2 though is that I have never like the reason why, for example, the G2 TES 3-0 was so impressive is have never thought of G2 as like an early game team since probably like 2016, 2017 was maybe the last time because that was when they were holding themselves back from like started holding themselves back from killing their opponents in scrims because they wouldn't get the same leads internationally, so they played like way worse early games. Almost intentionally, and then I think they focused a lot more on mid game macro. And I wouldn't say probably right now that they're intentionally playing bad early game, but hasn't been their focus for many years in terms of what they improve on. So I think that that's definitely an element of it where it's like, okay, this is how the series should have gone. Maybe it's an exaggerated version of how the series, like it's the caricature of how the series should have gone. But in theory, Fnatic should have a stronger early game approach. And in theory, G2 should have a way stronger mid game. Fnatic have a lot of really random mid game rotations where they just force mid, and that did happen. And they didn't play coordinated. And I think one of the things, maybe to people's credit, is that Fnatic usually play pretty decent team fights, right? They usually play the team fights well, and there was a lot of poor performance in team fights, in particular from them, which was uncharacteristic. So I do think that that's valid. But in general, I would expect G2 to have a way stronger mid game and Fnatic to have a stronger early game. And that's how I would expect the matchup to go generally.
We talked about this in spring as well, where like really I feel like the negative feedback loop or LEC performance is like the highest I've seen it in a really long time for Europe overall, including the EU LCS days. Like you would have to go back to some of those like 20, not even, because I feel like people still kind of expected them to punch up internationally, even if they would say like, oh, this play is super boring, no one does anything for 40 minutes. And it's really interesting to me because when you and I talked about G2 going into MSI, when we were doing like our MSI preview, we brought up several times like talking about their finals, even before their finals, but then talking about like, okay, what is this team going to do internationally? Their early game was a problem that we pointed out, that they were going to have a lot, like if you can't get to the point in the mid game where they can have the good lane assignments that we were pointing out, or if teams learn how to deal with their swap better, we were like, okay, this team might have issues because they struggle in the early game, even against LEC teams that are not as good as a team like BLG or TES are early, right? And that was what made the TES loss so shocking, was that they're, in particular, their bot lane 2v2, which looked really sus in this most recent final, like they absolutely destroyed Jackie Love and Mako and really, really took advantage of a lot of the hyper aggressive plays that they were doing. And that's actually what made talking about that series so interesting. It was like, okay, when we planned out a way for G2 to win, this was not what we saw coming in terms of the actual performance. And for me personally, as an analyst, that actually makes the series retroactively way more interesting to talk about than if things go to chalk. I think the other thing, just more broadly about like negative feedback loops, that since coming on to broadcast, I've felt a lot more viscerally, because even as a features writer, you get slotted into kind of punditry. Like essentially this is punditry, analysis, etc., right? But when you're on broadcast, you feel, or you get a lot of you bear the brunt of a lot of the community criticism regardless, because you are like the forward facing people on the broadcast for that region. And so when I joined in 2021, the broadcast itself for LCS was like, people were like, this region is shit. LCS is at its worst ever. And people were tying in like viewership numbers, and they were like, you need to change XYZ on the broadcast. And a lot of the times when it was the same, like it is for, like I'm seeing for LEC now, but for LCS, And the slow transformation in terms of like what people look at for regional success, I feel like a lot of times people equate things that aren't necessarily equatable, if that makes sense. Because like LCS has pretty positive feedback right now in terms of broadcast performance, in terms of team performance, in terms of gameplay. And the thing that people are like not necessarily harping on as much is viewership, by extension of the fact that everything else is like super positive, right? And it's just weird to me because when I first joined, that was all I heard about was like LCS is dying, this is a failing region, they should just pack it up. And even with the recent announcements and the visceral and, in my opinion, kind of earned reaction from the CBLOL community, there's still in NA at least, or in like English speaking Western punditry, a pretty positive spin on the LCS right now as compared to LEC. And the way that things feed off of each other is like so interesting to me, especially now being a member of the broadcast and also bringing viewership into it. LEC viewership is actually doing super well, uh, regardless of gameplay, which is something I kind of always want to bring up, if only because I constantly see people equating gameplay and like team performance to viewership when that is not the case. Um, and this sounds kind of rambly, but it's just because whenever these like massive feedback loops happen, it's a lot of like everything feeding into each other with people bundling a lot of bad or a lot of good into one thing when really a lot of these problems are multifaceted. And I'm not saying LEC doesn't have issues, because I feel like, especially talking to coaches and players in that region, they're really frustrated with a lot of things. And I like those things are very valid. Uh and they want change going into like next year, regardless of whatever happens at Worlds this year, right? Um and I think that's very valid as well. So but I also it also just really frustrates me when certain things aren't treated with nuance. I guess the expectation that for that happening is like should be pretty low, but
Yeah,
based
no,
on history.
nuance doesn't
But
isn't successful.
I still want to root for it, because like for from my perspective as being part of the LCS broadcast, a lot of the stuff that people are really happy about happening right now started the groundwork for that stuff really started in like 2022 spring, became slightly more obvious in 2022 summer in terms of like
Yeah.
actual broadcast stuff.
Mhm.
And then um really took hold in 2023 spring with the modular approach to um actual like broadcast segments, right? So a lot of the stuff that people are really happy about on the broadcast itself now, the groundwork for all of that was laid like way earlier. And the only reason I want to point that out is because a lot of these things are people only recognize it when it becomes much more obvious, or when they want to loop it into something more broader like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because I always reference this, but at the end of 2017, before I went into coaching, I was working on a project where I was interviewing English language casters from the major regions to talk about like the perceived impact of their casting and the tone they use on basically the enjoyment of the broadcast. And this is like for fans, this is also player mental, this is like a lot of different factors, right? And
Hmm.
that was at a time when people were LCS viewership was higher than LEC
Hmm.
than EU LCS viewership. People perceived it as there were like a lot of complicated aspects with language and all these things. But one of the things that I talked about a lot with like Dracos and Deficio at the time was Deficio tended to be very harsh when he was
Hmm.
commentating, and more critical, right? He was like famous for breaking down lane swaps on broadcasts and talking to a lot of coaches in 2016 and talking about lane swaps a lot and saying this is done well or this isn't done well. And there's a lot of emphasis on being analytical and those types of things on the ULCS broadcast, whereas in the LCS casting, there was a lot less of that. And obviously, the commentary landscape has changed a lot. The advent of co streaming, and a lot of times broadcasters don't have any control over how their narrative is perceived, or have way less control now than co-streamers do. So the question then becomes like, when the popular figures who are commentating the game, depending on what tone they have, that will impact audience perception, viewership. It will impact a lot of those things. So that's why I've always said that, commentators, they have a huge responsibility to be accurate as well as, you know, respectful in a way, because they have a lot more control than they think they do, you know? Um,
Yeah, you can
yeah.
decide someone's career a
Hmm.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like I
So,
don't like having that power, to be honest.
and a lot of people will roll their eyes, etc., but like players are actually a lot more suggestible than you would think, right? A lot of times players will hear a narrative and then it will become true because players are suggestible to what is being said on Reddit, or what is being said on a broadcast, or what is being said by a co-streamer. So I think that that's very much like players are people, right? Just the same way
I
fans
mean,
are
I
people.
don't I don't even think that's I don't even think
Yeah.
that's like a player thing. That's like
Yeah.
I think it's actually particularly susceptible with management if they
Yeah.
don't want to do actual scouting. But
Yep.
I also think like it's just part of like being a person.
Yeah.
Like I'm very susceptible to that kind of thing. Um,
It's easy for me to
it
second
just
guess
happens.
my opinion
Yeah, I
on
second guess
something
myself all the time.
because it is not the same as what someone else is saying, right? Like,
Yeah.
if this is why my stream viewers gaslight me all the time and say like, ah, you didn't say this, and it's like I have to think, oh, did I? It's just they know it's very easy for me to be gaslit. So I think that's one of those situations where um, but I guess like the reason why I bring up players in particular is because you would think that those would be the people who know the most about the game, or who know the most about like the accuracy of information, because they're living and breathing it and playing it all the time. But very frequently, players are just as suggestible to this idea that so and so is very good, or so and so is very bad, or this is like a good way to approach this, etc., without doing like even though they should have like more research, more experience, all of these things, players can still be susceptible, which is why I brought players up in particular. Um, so it's interesting to me, just in general, the idea of the impact of commentary and community zeitgeist and perception, and this is why like the media uh, era, as it has continued to evolve and information has been so susceptible, or it has been so available. It's just it's like this in every industry, you know. It's like this everywhere, so it's kind of crazy time to be around. But anyway, good. That's a whole other can of worms.
Uh, I
Yeah.
will say this as a I guess as a closing argument because I know you have a heart out and I do actually want to get to the other topics.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that's also it's really interesting to think about how the LEC rebrand, where the direction was literally our teams are fucking great
Yep. Hmm.
and we're going to really talk up every single team. We're going to make
Yep.
a really big point of like when we are criticizing something, we are focusing on the positive play from the winning side and much less on the negative play from the losing side. And then additionally, that coincided with G2 actually being a really fucking good team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was, I think, a perfect storm of like how this works, right? Um, but then additionally, another thing I'll say, if there's like hope for Europe in terms of like how do you break out of this, that final that I mentioned previously that I still have like nightmares about. Not really, but the UOL Fnatic Spring 2015 final was bad. Fnatic went to MSI, the first ever MSI in Tallahassee, Florida. Kelsey was there in person, live, to watch EDG win. Um, they did surprisingly well. And the narrative going into that tournament was very much that TSM were going to perform better than them because of, I believe, their IEM win. That was a very weird year, by the way. That was the WE, the WE beating GE Tigers year
Mm-hmm.
as well. Like, um, but then after that, the watching that Fnatic team go through and where they ended up, that started a positive feedback loop in their direction, right? Where they're like, oh man, if our final was this rough, but then Fnatic performed this well at MSI, then we can't be that bad, right? So like it's also there are ways to break out of it, but I think for NA and EU in particular, because we have so few international competitions and because our scheduling is respectively borked for both regions in very different ways domestically, uh it's it's always so hard carried by perception of international performance. So I'll throw that out there as like a real life example from the past using one of the bad finals I remember.
So, I mean, basically what you're saying is none of this matters, and media is irrelevant, and all that matters is that NRG beat G2 at Worlds last year. Okay, so
I mean, I love
this,
that for NRG. Not gonna lie, I love those guys.
but no, I mean, I still think that definitely that has an impact, but the media reactions to it snowballs to an extent where everything becomes exaggerated. And again, nuance is dead. So, with that,
Sad.
let's talk about how TL is the greatest Western team of all time. They will be playing Cloud9, etc. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the litmus test for C9 more than anything else, right? Because they are it's the undefeated in series team um versus the other undefeated in series team. And but C9, so like when you take into consideration, it reminds me a lot of like uh some of my current LCK commentary, but then when you and I previously would get asked about LPL teams and we'd be like, yeah, but they haven't faced like the actual top teams, because when you have a single round robin, you end up being a lot more schedule dependent than you think. And LCS right now is so few games, even with best of threes, that the fact that C9 faces TL and then FlyQuest in their final two matches is really awesome for me narratively. But then because it's like really hype to build up these matches, right? Because these are definitively our three best teams based on like gameplay. But I also think this is the big litmus test for C9, because it's like, okay, they have beaten everyone that they are supposed to beat. There's been a lot less variance in terms of upsets because of best of threes. And now, so they don't have like the one off, like in a best of one where you're looking at this loss is slightly more meaningful. Whereas they just have the loss to Dig, I think, right? That's the only game loss they have,
I think so.
unless I'm insane. I'm gonna check to make sure I'm not talking out of my ass. Yeah,
I
it is.
mhm.
Um, so hyping up them going up against TL is really fun. Um, but also this for me is a big test for C9 because I think they have improved as a team, but in a way where they've improved at the things that they were already good at in a meta where it suits them very, very well. Like this meta suits them so much better than Spring did. Um in particular, like Vulcan playing engaged supports, um the 80 mid and AP jungle has been super interesting and has suited them really well. The way that topside works on the map, I think, even with some of the mistakes we've seen and like not necessarily, in my opinion, snowballing it even as hard as they could early, has suited them. I still think there are some pretty obvious cracks in their gameplay as well. Some of which showed in particular in that first game against NRG, where you had the C9 comfort comp versus NRG's comp that actually dealt really well with what C9 were trying to do. And then it came down to a throw at Baron. Baron. Um, and it's really interesting going up against TL, who I think are constantly, whenever I talk to that team, so hard on themselves in terms of their execution because they are maybe not aiming for perfection, but they're definitely aiming to be a team that makes noise internationally. And like that is very much their goal, right? Not that they're looking beyond their NA opponents because they're absolutely not, but they're also they want to improve in certain things while recognizing that NA teams are not always going to challenge them to improve on those things. And I still think they have, even in their messier games, a better understanding of mid game and better lane assignments. Whereas C9, I think, have adopted the classic attitude of like, and I'm not saying this is bad, by the way, it's just a very different way. Uh, the attitude of like, we have really, really good players. And if we train those players to play super, super well and hard slam everything we're good at, and it's also a strong meta for them, they end up looking even better. Um, so yeah, I think I I am still favoring TL. Because I still think they have a stronger macro understanding, and I will not, uh, but I will not be surprised if C9 win, and if C9 win, I think it's going to be them really slamming early game and then being able to close it out.
What if C9 get like a 6K gold lead in two of the games and then still lose? Is that
So
would
I
that
actually
make
won't
them
be
the worst
surprised.
teams of all time? I think it
No.
might. Anyway, yeah. So I think no, because I mean this dynamic exists. That's the thing that's crazy to me is that this dynamic exists pretty much across every region.
Mhm.
There's teams focus on different parts of the game and getting better at different parts of the game. And C9, I still think C9's mid game macro is not great. But TL's like big advantage is just their map understanding in general. So I favor TL because I don't even think that their laning is that bad. They don't get like completely blown out in lane as much either. So I don't think they'll be easy to get slammed by C9. I don't think C9 will get like insane snowball leads against them. So I think TL can hold the game decently. So that's kind of where I am there. I also think the APA JoJo narrative is very interesting. Um, that'll be very fun to watch. It's gonna be an exciting match for sure, and I think that's like the big thing is the storytelling has been extremely good, and the players have engaged with the storytelling, and that's what makes this match really exciting, and then that's what makes people really excited for it. Whereas I feel like I don't know the individual player narratives for G2 and Fnatic as much this year, right? I feel like I haven't
Mhm.
really gotten that perspective nearly as well as I have from the LCS, and I also think that that ends up influencing people's perception of whether or not they want or are excited for something or not. So, yeah. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, Dom even made a tweet about KC where he said, no matter what, like, even if the French fans are obnoxious, my friends are on that team and I want them to succeed. So it's like, if you have that kind of connection to a player, or if you have that kind of connection to a storyline, your perception of how good of a quality the match is or how good of a quality their performances are will actually be influenced. It's just, again, we're very susceptible. We're all humans. So, um, yeah, anyway, should be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it helps that the players themselves seem really excited about the matchup as well. To your point. And then additionally, I actually really like that it is this clash of styles, right? Because these two teams do play very differently. And I I like that C9 have kind of kept slamming comfort. Um I actually really like when a team does that until it doesn't work because I feel like they have just looked a lot more confident as players. I think they still have some work to integrate Thanatos, whose laning statistics have been really, really good, into the rest of the team. In particular, I think his Gnar performances against NRG were a little bit lackluster when you're looking at like what you want from a Gnar in team fights, and joining up with the rest of the team. But that's like some really nitpicky stuff that they could work on. But that's also the interesting thing to me, right? Is that these two teams are both very confident in the way that they want to approach every game, and watching those two styles clash against each other is super interesting to me.
No, it's bad. We can't throw games in 2024. It's bad. Anyway,
Oh
so
my god.
I swear that is like the critic. That's what people say when you ask like why was GT Fnatic
So
bad. They say the game was they throw a 6K gold lead. Okay, that happens
so
every
wait,
day.
tangent. What do you think of this statistic? I think I've spent too much time around Jet. But the I want there to be a statistic, like, across the board. Maybe I'll workshop it with Liam, who's honestly, I message him so much about, like, random stats things. Um, and you notice I don't even use stats that much on broadcast necessarily, but I love cooking up random stats. And this one would be the time in game from the what you consider the throw to the winning team ending, and like what that average is, right? Because I swear it became the time between the throw and the G2, the Fnatic throw and the G2 win became like shorter as the series went on, which was
Sure.
also more infuriating for viewers. But I would love this stat just because I think it'd be funny to look at LPL teams in particular with this statistic.
Sure. I mean, I think
Anyway,
we
sorry, that's a tangent, but like I
yeah,
do think it's way more infuriating to watch a team throw in a really specific way and then have the team close out. Like that's what was so disappointing to me about the C9 win, the C9 game 1 win for NRG is like NRG literally threw, like chucked it at Baron. They had that game pretty well in hand, and then C9 are suddenly ending the game. Like I don't think we even had time to go back to a replay to talk about the Baron fight. That's how quickly C9 ended up winning. So I think those throws stick in people's minds a lot more because the time from throw to end is so quick.
That's interesting. It's definitely something because it's like I don't know if you could train. You could probably train a program to identify what a throw is
Yeah,
based on
that's the issue.
a gold differential. You probably could do that. I remember in 2021 when I spoke to Soham, who's a very very cool guy. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, um, Valens, like people who know Counter Strike. But anyway, the main thing there was that they had like a win probability statistic, and they could isolate what their program perceived as a throw versus what like the audience perceived as a throw. So, for example, a big game was like a big example was like an MSI game where C9 played and people were flaming Blabber because he like got caught in river. And but their data actually showed that the game was basically lost when Sven backed late on top lane like 5 minutes before, and
Oh,
the probability that C9 would win after that was actually dropped considerably, but everyone flamed like the Blabber river catch. Um, so it wasn't perfect. There was obviously like a lot of issues with it, but it was an interesting idea because for sure I do think that there are nuances in games that people kind of miss when they're saying this was the throw or this was where they lost, and so yeah, like just that concept is kind of fun to talk about. So yep, pretty much. We have a little bit of time. Go ahead.
Liam, and we'll cook up something.
Yeah, yeah, should be fun.
Hopefully.
We have a little bit of time before I have to head out. Um, so I did want to ask you if KT still suck
Yes.
after this week. Emily just
Oh
seems
my
like
god.
you need a
Yes.
sign. Don't ask me. KT are still bad. You know.
Yeah. They're gonna lose to Bro. Uh they're gonna do the thing where it's like they lose. I was talking to a chronicler about this last night, or like actually really a few hours ago. Um where he's like they're gonna lose to Bro 1-2, so it's like a perfect even, like 3-3. 3-3 on the week. I think so. The biggest things from the HLE game that I would like to talk about, I guess positively for KT. I know I'm saying things positive about KT. It's like insane. But previously, you and I had actually talked about this for both T1 and KT, where they both seemed like they were really struggling with the AD mid AP jungle meta. Like they both really looked uncomfortable in it. And the solution for both of these teams was literally just like return to Azir and Talia, and in Faker's case Ari. And I actually thought that was like a good idea for them, right? Because in T1's case, I actually think Owner's been playing pretty well. I think putting Faker on something he's way more comfortable in, if he is not super comfortable in the current AD meta, is good. And I feel the same way about BDD, right? Where I thought, okay, just return return to Azir and Talia, and things that you're going to be more comfortable on, and put Pioshik on something like, I mean, if the Kindred isn't super viable right now, something like a Viego, or something, an AP jungle where he's going to have more lane interaction or something like that, right? Or Vi. But the interesting thing that happened in this HLE series, besides people shitting on Peanut Shavana, was the fact that they actually looked more comfortable and confident with BDD on AD mid, specifically Corki, which I thought was really nice. that is a positive thing in KT's favor, because I still don't think we've seen the last of AD mid, AP jungle, even with the changes coming through on the most recent patch. So I think a lot of it, as we talked about, I know no one watches LCS Waiting Room, but Kobe and I talked about this in regards to not only itemization and champion buffs slash nerfs, but the fact that jungle XP, which is something you and I talked about as like one of the biggest changes going into the current meta, is just more valuable, right? So like farming junglers get rewarded way more easily than lane interaction. So that seeing that KT looked more comfortable in the current meta was like very nice to see. And then occasionally Beryl just has these games where he just shows up. I know people joke around about like, oh man, he's decided he needs to make more money for like the latest Genshin patch, or like Natlan's being released in, I don't know, like a month or something. So he needs to save up for like a new crop of waifus. Regardless of whatever that is, like it's always really funny when Beryl just has like random really strong performances, because you then remember like, oh, this is how this guy has won multiple world championships. It's always fun to see. I think Beryl is a really funny player. So
I had a question from chat, which is like, if we think TL play, why we think TL plays well into T1? I guess I'm not sure that I feel like they do. I think we just see them play each other a lot. So we have the perception, and it depends on like what your gauge is of well. Because I would argue that like they had the game where they did well in early, right? And but that everyone can do that against T1, where you can do well early in a single game, and then though more recently the iteration of T1 has been a lot more early game focused. But historically speaking, like last year, for example, during the world's group stage, people still bring up like the APA solo killing faker, which um, again, I think there's a long list of rookie mids who have solo killed faker, but I guess for me, I don't necessarily think TL play particularly well into T1. If anything, I would think T1 would be good against TL stylistically. So, yeah.
I mean, I think T1 take advantage of, and I say this as like a massive T apologist. But like is like greatest flaw is his over aggression, in particular in the mid game when he doesn't necessarily have vision or wave prio to back it up. I think one thing that TL has really succeeded in integrating onto the team, and one of the things that I talked about last split as one of the big difference makers for me in terms of what this team is looking like, was the fact that when would invade early, they would have lane prio or they would have vision set up to allow for that, and they would be working in tandem with these expected invades from around like 3 minutes. And as the game goes on, is a player who will go for some of these really still aggressive like overextensions, either for vision or to farm camps or to try to get a flank or whatever he's trying to do. And he doesn't always necessarily have the prio to back that up. And I think you saw T1 take advantage of that really, really well in their MSI series. And I'm not saying it's all like T's fault or whatever. I'm just pointing out like one thing that I think T1 do well to kind of corral some of the things that TL are going to do. So yeah, I don't know if TL have a specifically good matchup into T1. I know TL themselves are really disappointed in themselves that they weren't able to close out those games though. And I think the direction and overall mindset of this TL team is very good, and they have like a lot of company resources, I guess, to draw on to try to keep them at a level where they're continually trying to challenge themselves so they can hopefully be better for anticipated international competition.
Yeah, but as we just established before this question, it's a shame we won't get to see this rematch because KT will be making Worlds over 2-1.
My God, no.
So, because KT, they found their groove. They found their style. They can't be stopped.
You watch, they're gonna lose to Bro. But yeah, so if they're to return to the KT part, if there was one like really good thing I saw coming out of the HLE series, it was that, right? It was that they did seem more comfortable and confident with things that are better in the current meta. And that is a good sign for KT because previously I would have just been like, throw it out, play the stuff you're good at, even if it's not like the best thing right now based on the jungle XP changes and like 80 AP farming, 80 mids AP farming jungles. Um, so yeah, I mean, we'll see. But I still don't think KT are making. All right, I cannot bet on them as KT.
Nice. I'll be seen as the true fan when it happens. Never doubted them.
True,
Yeah.
true, true. You can totally make me.
Anyway, the I'm not even a KT fan. It's whatever.
I know.
It doesn't hurt me like it hurts you. Uh, let's. So I have to go. So give me your like 30-second take on Aurora.
She is super annoying to deal with as a melee top laner. I do think we will, if not see her played in LCS this week, at least see a few bans thrown her way.
I think she can be played in 5 roles. So that'll be fun.
She has a
Yeah.
very high win rate. I mean, I kind of expect people to just permaban it, but I also expected the same for Skarner, and Skarner got through the first week when he was mega broken, so we'll see.
Yep, we will indeed see. We will do a lot of seeing. Anyway, my take is that she's broken, which is to the shock of everyone. Oh my god, a new champion's broken. That's crazy. I think she's seems super fun though. Like very mobile. A lot of creativity can happen, especially around her ult. Um, so I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be fun. I actually kind of think when she gets nerfed or like changed, she'll probably end up being a support because she just has so much utility. But
Mm,
again, it really depends on her damage numbers. Because she could very
yeah.
easily like go the way of Lilia too. But she has like way less AOE. So yeah, I mean she
I mean, I
feels a
think
lot like Lilia.
yeah, the infuriating thing now, I think, for people is that she's just so good into a lot of melee tops, and even if she doesn't necessarily have the burst damage to like murder you, she's just so annoying in lane. And then everything her kit brings to like team fights
Yeah.
is pretty much insane. And she's basically like, even if she's not gonna blow you up, she's so mobile and so annoying for you to try to kill her. It's also just infuriating to play against.
Mhm. Indeed. Well, anyway, I will do my best because I have to get on another plane in a bit.
Have a safe day.
I will do my best to get this edited and out before the weekend. Because I also have to go somewhere this weekend. It's a thing. But yeah,
Thank you for taking the time.
So in any case, obviously it's now free to access this channel, so I'll make sure to tweet that out or to see past VODs, so everyone will at least have access to it today. But
There we
thanks.
go. Okay.
Oh wow,
I was wondering if
nice.
it was gonna do it.
Let's
It
go
did that one
Discord.
time, and it was freaked out.
Yeah, it was great. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week at some point. In I don't know. It's like of a pop up shop. You
A
never
mystery.
know. You never know when it'll appear on your timeline. So anyway, have a good one and enjoy the league this weekend.